Hi, today we are going to talk about product development with a PDO, a product development organization for developing Salesforce products for enterprises. My name is Jay Kapadia. I am the director of software development for orchestrated customer engagement product inside of IQVIA. I have personally been involved in developing 7 Salesforce App Exchange apps, 3 App Store apps, 2 Android apps, and 1 Mac App Store app, and most recently a Windows app. I've been around the healthcare industry for roughly around 10 years. In my past life, I used to work in the high tech domain for semiconductor manufacturing. And personally, I have had the privilege of having a very strong team working with me to develop all the products I have. And I have a passion to build teams, products, and above all, future leaders as we develop these products. I work at IQVIA. IQVIA is a healthcare solutions company. We help healthcare companies and manufacturers take a molecule to market all the way from a compound or an idea to it becoming a drug and getting its FDA approval to all the way to the market to create brand awareness, loyalty, and follow all the compliance rules and laws which are country specific. In doing that, we help improve patient outcomes in those therapeutic areas and also try and create efficiencies where a much needed drug can reach its much needing patient at a faster velocity. We have our own proprietary data, we have our consulting services, and we have our products which helps healthcare companies and manufacturers uh, deliver this value to its patients and doctors. I personally work in the healthcare technology solutions division, which creates products for, at IQVIA. In that particular product division, we truly believe in creating products on a world-class platform. Salesforce in that is a big partner for us. We truly believe that the global scale and scope of Salesforce and its transformative platform can help IQVIA and its domain knowledge, deliver best-in-class platform and help our customers take a molecule to market in the most efficient, effective, and most compliant manner possible. Uh, so today our topic of discussion is product development on Salesforce using a product development organization. So the way we are going to, the way I have structured this conversation is that first we're going to understand what a PDO is. Then we are going to understand why is a PDO needed. Why can't just we hire these folks and develop our own products? That's also a fairly valid option, but why is generally a PDO option taken? Why is there a need to have a strategy and a very concrete set of guidelines which is needed? And then we are gonna at the end we are gonna discuss what are some of those guidelines are from a product perspective, process perspective, and then people perspective. So without further ado, we are gonna jump right into the word PDO. What is a PDO? PDO is a product development organization made very famous by Salesforce and its partner organization. They represent uh, a broad spectrum of consulting partners, development partners, and vendors with expertise in building commercial apps, as well as valuable other services like training, funding, marketing, selling your app, etc. Right? So it is a PDO as a term is not only limited to development, but it could be consulting, it could be training, it could be funding, marketing, so on and so forth. Now let's tackle the question of why is a PDO needed, right? Most companies, right, when they have to develop a product in Salesforce, and they feel that they have a good product market fit, and they see that a customer is very receptive to an idea, they want to start fast, right? They want to ensure that they reach the market for that particular set of needy enterprises and that for that ideas fast, for which they have to hit the ground running. But I don't know about you guys, but hiring in large companies take time, right? We have to get the necessary approvals. We have to get a business plan ready. We have to get HR to approve the positions, the locations, the cost. Salesforce market is extremely, extremely hot just now, and to hire all those kinds of skill sets can become a very time-consuming task. Second, even if you have some development skills, the resources in-house, the learning curve for the Salesforce skill set can be extremely high, right? This is not .NET or Java, right? The languages you're going to develop is in Apex and Lightning, and Salesforce has its own proprietary UI framework, a fourth generation backend language, which you need to learn on how to get work done with. So that could be another very time consuming aspect. But other things which I think I just talked about is speed to market, right? We want to make sure that we hit the ground running and we get the MVP out as soon as possible, right? No, without any time to be without any time to be spent on bureaucracy or red tape or learning time as possible. It could happen over time where you hire more people and kind of get this knowledge in-house, but a PDO can and be very, very effective to hit the ground running and get an MVP out as soon as possible. Fourth, very tricky again, these apps which you plan to deploy to the market need to be approved by Salesforce. Now, there is a lot of tribal knowledge which the PDOs generally have where they understand on how and what are some tips and tricks which you can use ground up to develop these apps in a way that your approval of Salesforce can become faster, right? Some frameworks to ensure you are doing field level security properly, or some frameworks to ensure that there are less security vulnerabilities involved here, things like that. And last but not the least is speed to scale. Hiring a lot of developers at the same time is generally not really possible. So if you want to scale up your teams into feature-based squads, more than one or two squads, it could be a time-consuming. It could be a time-consuming process. So PDOs can help you scale up those squads really quickly because they have trained resources who can hit the ground running as soon as possible. So this is why generally a PDO is needed. Once again, just to summarize, hiring can be tough. Hiring a lot of developers and testers and scrum masters can be even tougher. A learning curve on the Salesforce skills for your existing developers who may be skilled on Angular, React, Java, .NET is not that simple. Most companies want to hit the market with an MVP very quickly because ideas nowadays can be used in other organizations to get farther quicker. So speed to market is a big deal. And last but not the least, we want to ensure that we start with some level of tribal knowledge on what techniques to use to get a faster approval from Salesforce for the app. Now let's talk about why is a strategy needed when you engage with a PDO. So sure, now we all agree that okay, a PDO is needed to be engaged to develop a Salesforce product. Why is the now why do the leadership on the engaging party need to sit down and create a strategy, right? Why can't we just hand it over to the PDO and say you lead the development and we will just give you requirements? Why can't we do that, right? Well, that is not, for my experience, that has not been a very successful strategy, right? Uh, PDOs are generally very good at development, right? But still, the engaging company has the business knowledge. They have a long-term understanding of why they are building this product. So outsourcing development to a PDO is great and great for scaling, but outsourcing all aspects of design, architecture, especially high level architecture, is can become disastrous, right? Because the PDO, to be fair to them, are pretty new to sometimes to the domain or sometimes to the company and their long-term vision and things like that, which takes time, and there can be some basic architecture decisions which can be made, which can be very tough to uh, tough to resolve once those architecture decisions are made and an MVP is out or some customers start using it. The other strategy which also needs to be figured out is what is the onshore versus offshore versus nearshore strategy the engaging company has. So, for example, if IQVIA is engaging with a PDO, what are their needs around the clock development versus near shore or same time zone based development, right? Depending on that, different PDOs can help. There are PDOs who can do development and design hand in hand in the same time zone by onshoring and nearshoring. And then there are great talented PDOs available in other continents where they can do development once they take some kind of a knowledge grab. Initially, they can do this development just by doing some small ceremonies on a daily basis in an offshore kind of an environment. The other reason we need to have a strategy is to we need to figure out what is a squad structure. There are a lot of models in agile which can be adopted, right? There is the Spotify model, which is a squad structure, which are kind of self uh, self governing groups which can do requirements all the way to ops kind of a thing themselves. And then there are other Scrum models which only do development testing and planning for a feature or a mix of features. So that all needs to be to figured out before we give a go to the PDO. Communication skills is some another very important, especially if you're going to use offshoring. Then it is an extremely important it is an extremely important uh, skill set to evaluate because if you are offshoring and then the PDO cannot communicate that well on phone or video or chat, it could be a very difficult proposition if they don't know English that well, especially if for global companies, it could be very difficult. Last couple of things to think about before we engage with the PDO is what is a long-term vision and strategy for the product to be developed, and then is the PDO we are trying to select aligned to that vision, right? If regardless of how great development organization it is, but if fundamentally it thinks that develop vision and the development is different, then their vision and strategy of development is different than what the engaging company's vision and strategy is, it doesn't work, right? For example, if on Salesforce they believe that everything should not have Salesforce UI, for example, they want to develop your own UI, but the engaging party wants to develop an app on Salesforce using Salesforce Lightning, then that could be a pretty, pretty tough alignment gap, which we may not be able to bridge over time. So at that time, there needs to be a discussion around, is the PDO the right partner? And last but not the least, we have also need to have a clear strategy on tools using which we can catch bugs, code duplications, and code smells. In this day and age, having doing manual code reviews to catch duplications and code smells uh, is is uh, is is a desirable only for extremely complex code, but there are great tools available like checkmarks and sonar cube and other tools which can help uh, do this automatically, and those tools need to be discussed upfront with the PDO partner so that there is no issue or challenge later. Now that we have determined, yes, what is a PDO, yes, we need a PDO, and yes, these are the things we need to have guidelines around, and this is why we need a strategy to engage with the PDO. Let's discuss the what part, right? What are the different aspects of people, of process, and of for the product which needs to be hashed out with the PDO before engaging with them, or at the initial part of the engagement, without which a successful development of the product is not possible. Let's start with the people aspect. I think people is the most important aspect of this equation. Without this, we cannot have a great product developed, right? Number one, we need the engaging company should and must share their values, right? Their cultural aspects with the PDO, right? If there is no alignment between these values of what are, some permission to play values, what are some aspirational values, right? Things like ship early, ship often, or uh, trust first culture, or non-cynical happy and creation of non-cynical happy environments. These are very important aspects of a culture, and some very important values of a system which needs to be shared and agreed upon with the PDO so that a similar culture is developed. Otherwise, when these two cultures match up and they don't have a discussions about this depth of values and behaviors and cultures, at times different features will have a different feel to the end user or the clients, and they will be able to make out which which group is developing what. So again, it's very important to have a list of shared values and culture between the engaging company and the PDO. Number three is relationships. It is very, very important. So to in the proverbial way, to have a beer with along with the PDO team members, right? To spend some time with them, knowing their background, having some deeper relationships, so that healthy confrontations can be had when determining the architecture and when determining the design of the product, right? If the PDO is not able to step up and say that, hey, we feel this is not the right way to go and this is why, then we have lost the battle, right? This is not a one-way street. We PDOs are not supposed to be just waiters taking orders. We need PDOs who are partners who can add as much values as the engaging party. We also need to develop some patience. First few demos, the bi-weekly sprint demos, are gonna be rocky at best. They will have some roadblock blocks. We need to create an atmosphere of patience, trust, and kind of enjoying the long-term small wins, so that we can make long-term progress and we can make long-term headway in the development of this product. We also need to ensure that there is very, very tight and frequent communication between the developers of various locations, PDOs, employees of the engaging party. There needs to be a very tight collaboration and communication which needs to go on between these teams, so that it is open and transparent, and B, it is very, very frequent, so no side feels that the decisions are made without them being involved. And there is over time a happy environment is created where everybody wants what's best for the product and what's best for the client. Last but not the least, there needs to be some long-term leadership alignment. Leadership of the PDO and the leadership of the engaging company needs to align on certain key values like agility, like um, uh, uh, speed of deployment, like tools and partners to use for developing the products and things like that. So these are some of the um, uh, activities and some of the tasks to do to bring in people level alignment. If you don't do anything out of this, ensure you at least talk about shared values and culture, and you bring in long-term leadership alignments when you develop along with a PDO. Let's talk about process, right? Process again, if you're scaling up and scaling up very fast with a lot of squads for development, it is very, very important to understand uh, certain key process aspects. So, starting with the architecture and data model strategy. I would say extremely, extremely important. There needs to be initially a month carved out along with the PDO where we can sit face to face and figure out what are some of the deep architecture questions and decisions which need to be made, and then what are the options for each of these decisions, and then what do we pick, knowing what we know at that point in time. Same with data models. Key understanding around what is public, what is private, or what is master detail, what is lookups. Those decisions need to be made so that long-term uh, product can sustain the the growth of more and more customers, more and more countries, more and more laws which needs to be abided by the product. A document strategy is again very important. When do you document? Do you document every sprint? Do you document every release? How do you document your code? How do you document your features? How do you do your end user documentation? So on and so forth needs to be finalized. What kind of project development module are we going to use? Is it going to be completely agile where we deploy a product every 2 weeks? Is it going to be waterfall where we get requirements and then do 1 year of development and do and deploy? Or is it some kind of a hybrid scrum fall kind of a model where because of compliance reasons, we do something like what Salesforce does, where we do 3 releases a year and with multiple patches to fix bugs um, every week or every 2 weeks. Code review guidelines again needs to be finalized for every single language. It could be Lightning, it could be Apex, it could be Swift, it could be Aura. All those needs to be hashed out and documented. There needs to be an honest conversation to be held around test-driven development, because we feel test-driven development can reduce long-term long-term maintenance of the code base. Also, as you are developing more tests, your code would be more modular, so you would be able to reuse more. And ultimately, though, while development it may take a little more time, but the time it saves for by writing reusable code, by writing modular code, by writing testable code, by reducing bugs is way more advantageous than writing the than what the time you save by not writing the unit tests up front. So a discussion needs to be had with the PDO and with the other developers who are touching code as to how much is the test coverage we promise before we deploy, uh, and we call that particular feature done. Right? If you're using Scrum, defining what is done, things like tests, things like documentation, things like code reviews complete needs to be determined as to what is done. The last few things which needs to be determined are tech debt needs to be figured out as to how do we manage this tech debt, where to register. It is always good to, if you're using something like Confluence, it's always good to have a space if our development teams to manage their debt, and then whenever they get some time, they can pick up some items from there uh, to to resolve check debt over time rather than letting it accumulate and result into rewrites over time. Jira developer workflows are again very important. Do you do you use something like Kanban where you go from to do to in progress to done, or do you have a much more sophisticated workflow where you go from to do to develop to code review to ready for testing to done needs to be also determined. And last but not the least, your DevOps practices are very, very important to retain good employees. If over time, as you scale and as you get more developers, if you don't do automation around deployments, around releases, around post sprint environment refreshes, you will lose people because people are more interested in doing innovating, challenging work rather than manual work, which kind of grows over time. Code refresh from the main master branch again. A lot of DevOps work needs to be thought through to make it a more pleasant experience to develop in. Let's talk about the product. Product being developed on Salesforce, there are some very key aspects which needs to be developed to be thought around, right? Because Salesforce is unique. It is not a Oracle database or it is not a Access database which you can develop using traditional thought processes. First and foremost, let's talk about uh, strategy around when to use triggers, when to use batches, and when to use platform events. It is extremely simple for the traditional Salesforce development firms to put everything in a before or an after trigger and then call it a day. Guess what? The day we dump a lot of data in Salesforce and test it, those triggers are going to start timing out. Those triggers are going to throw some heap size errors, some Apex CPU time limits, and things like that, which is not a pleasant experience for our customers. So a very concrete level of criteria needs to be created on when to write before trigger, when to write after trigger, when to write a queuable batch, a schedulable batch, and then last but not the least, with the advent of platform events, do we even need after insert triggers? If it's an after insert trigger, why can't we just send it to a platform event which will give you better performance, and it will scale much better than a trigger, and it will also help you maintain some transactional integrity for the important aspects in a trigger, and then the asynchronous aspects in an event. Secondly, it needs to be determined if you are going to use the Salesforce One mobile app or Salesforce Lightning app for mobile, or you're going to develop your own mobile app. If you're going to develop your own mobile app, you need to figure out what is the platform you want to use, iOS versus Android, or Kotlin versus Swift, or Xamarin versus Flutter. These are all some key conversations which need to be had depending on the usage of the devices, right? For say, for example, in IQVIA's business domain, iPad has a very large market share. Some 87% of IQVIA products end users use have an iPad. So we decided to go with native Swift language to develop our app. But this is not the case with every app. You may want to choose a cross-platform development framework like a Flutter or a Xamarin to develop your app to scale up in different markets and different platforms faster. Now, you also need to determine if you are going to develop a offline application. By offline, I mean that you will have a sync engine which will sync Salesforce data down to the device, and you will have offline data so that if you don't have internet, your app still works, and whenever the app finds the internet, it basically goes ahead and syncs that data up. So that if you want to develop an offline app, you need to understand what are the different options you have for an offline database. Where do you want to store the data? Do you want to go columnar? Do you want to go with a core data like model? There are other options like Realm DB or CouchDB. There are options like SQLite, Core Database, Core DB from iOS. So these are some options you need to consider to figure out what offline database you want to use. Number four is your metadata strategy, especially for your mobile piece and your configuration piece. If you have a very deep need to create a configuration layer, then your strategy needs to be determined. Do we use custom permissions or custom settings? Do we use custom settings or custom metadata? Do we read the metadata which we get at an object level and a field level in terms of defaulting values, um, uh, uh, in terms of getting uh, the validations of something being mandatory or not, is null allowed or not. How do we read that metadata? At the end of the day, if your app is configuration driven, this becomes extremely important because you want the app to be configurable, but at the same time, you want it to be easy to configure, to be used. So that it becomes very hard for customers to if it becomes very hard for customers and they have to manage two configurations, one for Salesforce and one for mobile, it kind of takes a hit on the adoption of the product. Salesforce objects versus custom objects. There are objects which Salesforce comes with: account, user, leads, opportunities, products. Do we use those objects or do we create custom objects? Depending on the need and requirements, this will change. So it needs to be a thorough study needs to be done on what Salesforce objects are existing, part of your partnership agreement, and what do they give you versus what do they not give you, and then from that we need to determine as to what custom objects which we will create for our package. The more the objects, the harder the Salesforce approves. So we need to be very, very careful for that. Last few points to think about in terms of product decisions along with the PDO. uh, as we create more and more custom objects, the relationship with the Salesforce objects or relationship between two custom objects, are they lookups, are they master detail, are they private, or are they public? Do you want a junction object or do you want a one-to-many connection? These decisions need to be made according to the requirements and business needs. But we also need to think about the future. Which other countries do you want to go live with? What are some compliance regulations there? And generally, it is better to take the most restrictive model and gives a little bit of custom sharing or a custom triggering mechanism to share that data rather than the most unrestricted one, because once you go with the unrestricted one, making it restrictive becomes impossible in the Salesforce platform for use. Last but not the least, UI frameworks again becomes very, very important to determine. Nowadays with Lightning, you could use Angular, React, Lightning Web Components, Aura Web Components, Vue.js. So you could use any of these JavaScript core-based UI frameworks. So we need to understand the skill set of the app. We need to understand the skill set of the current developers we have, the PDOs we have, the time we need to train or skill some of these UI frameworks, and figure out as to which framework you need. Whatever you pick, stay consistent and stick with it for a few years before you change it, because it becomes very hard to maintain if you have multiple UI frameworks involved. Last but not the least, it's a no-brainer, but I have put it here to just to make sure that you understand the philosophy between Lightning and Classic. There are still a lot of products available which try to do both by giving support for both Lightning and Classic. I think we should just pick Lightning and stick with it, because Lightning is the future for Salesforce, and Salesforce is developing all the new products with the Lightning framework. So Lightning is one way to go, but still you need to evaluate your business and ensure that uh, ensure that everybody is on the same page. If you go all out with Lightning, if you go all out with Classic, or if you want to do both has a big impact on the cost and the time it takes to develop that. It would also have an impact on the skill set of the developers, because when you develop web pages in Classic, you will need to know what is Visual Force and how to develop Visual Force using Visual Force tag libraries versus just JavaScript, which is in case of Lightning. And in case of Lightning, you will need to have some kind of an understanding um, around Lightning Web Components and how do they work and so on and so forth. For both, though, I still strongly recommend understanding how do we do test-driven development using that. Test-driven development in these UI frameworks require some work, upfront work on creating mock data, creating a factory for generating different types of data for different types of objects on the fly, so that they can be used by your unit tests to test different scenarios, so on and so forth. So that's about it, folks. I don't have anything else. Again, my name is Jay Kapadia. I work for IQVIA. Uh, a lot of times, if you want speed to market, if you want to scale up quickly, you need a PDO to develop your product. But don't forget the three key aspects which we just talked about: the people with shared values and alignment on leadership, vision, and strategy, process around test driven development, around agile versus waterfall, and around Salesforce versus other platforms. And last but not least, product based strategies around using triggers versus batches versus platforms, UI frameworks between Aura and Lightning, Lightning and Classic, so on and so forth. So thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, and 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 good morning if from wherever you are joining.